Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss Fantasy Formula 1. F1 test week has concluded in Bahrain, so let's go over the results and see what I think these results mean for our F1 fantasy teams, which I hope we can begin tinkering with very, very soon. If you're new here or if you returned from last year, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, because as soon as the game drops, which should be at the beginning of next week, hopefully, this channel is going to absolutely pop off. I have so many videos ready in the backlog, ready to launch, and you do not want to miss those. So if you want your F1 fantasy fix of contents, this is the place to be. So subscribe so you don't miss it. Let's talk about test week. So I'm obviously not going to go over every single driver, every single result, every single lap, every single day. That's going to be a 16-hour long video, but I'm going to discuss some interesting talking points that just jump out at me before we know anything about what F1 fantasy in 2025 really looks like. So let me preface at the start of this video that all of this could change if they change anything about the game. You know, if F1 fantasy has changed, there are new rules, things of that nature, right? But also it's test week, right? How it usually sounds on social media is that if your team that you like or a driver that you like does well, then testing means everything. If the team that you root for doesn't do quite well, then testing doesn't mean anything. Or if a driver that you don't like, a team you don't like does well, it also doesn't mean anything. So again, everything I say in this video could end up being completely wrong, but I'm going to do my best with the result I have in front of me to make some quite damning statements about F1 fantasy in 2025. And let me start with the winner of day 2, I suppose, Carlos Sainz, right? Big talking point, Carlos Sainz fastest in day 2 of testing. How good are Williams? Is Carlos Sainz going to be on every team in F1 fantasy? And initially, seeing how well Sainz did in day 2 and how Albon also did, let's not forget about him, he was P3 in day 3. How well they did means that they're likely going to be very expensive. I cannot see F1 fantasy going easy on them in terms of pricing. I expect Sainz to probably be above 10 million now, and I did say a quite damning statement over on Ewan F1 Fantasy Pole Positions channel. We did a live stream yesterday. If you want to see that chat, then I'll leave a link to it in the description. It's about a 30-minute chat about day 2 of testing. And I did say that my hot take of the year was going to be that Carlos Sainz was going to be the trap asset, meaning that he's going to be on 75% of the teams and he's going to come away from Australia with -2 points. And what I mean by that is just that we don't know exactly how good Williams are in the long runs yet. Obviously, they look to be quite fast on single run pace, but we also don't know if they've closed the gap to top 4. I mean, we're talking about Williams here. If they're top of, like, best of the rest, that's good, but we really need them to, like, actually begin challenging the other top 4 teams if we're actually going to start talking about them as serious assets. Because until then, they're stuck in that C-tier bracket, the C-tier category. And when they are there, the points are limited. And not just C-tier in terms of, what their pricing is going to be like, but also in terms of points potential. Because sure, even in the, best case scenario, Carlos Sainz is best of the rest, ends up P9. Maybe he starts P9, maybe finishes P9, does a few overtakes on the way. That's going to be like a, between 6 to 10 pointer, maybe a bit more. That's still a good haul. He probably rises in price from that, but it's still not anywhere close to what these premium assets are providing us in our teams. It's not until you start pushing P5 and P4 where you actually start to bring in a lot of points. And then if, Carlos Sainz is sitting at a 14-15 million price tag, he could be in an essential sort of territory. And I don't know if we're there yet. I'm hesitant to say that Williams have closed the gap. I'm hesitant that Williams are even best of the rest compared to something like Haas and Alpine. Now, I'm going to talk about them later, but for now, let's just assume that this means Williams is going to be best of the rest and nothing else. And in that scenario, even then, could they be trap options in F1 fantasy for 2 reasons. One, I think they're going to be overpriced. I think Carlos Sainz could be very, very expensive going into this year. And number 2, we've seen what happens with Williams and other teams in that top of the mid-tier bracket when they're good in qualifying and then bad in the race. Carlos Sainz qualifies P11, finishes P11, that's 0 points. But even then, I could see a world in which Carlos Sainz qualifies P9, finishes the race in P12, and comes away of the weekend with -2 points, right? That is definitely a possibility. And in that case, do we want him in our teams if he's going to cost 14 million? Cautiously, pessimistic, I suppose, about Carlos Sainz. And as for Albon, I mean, Albon also did well. I think Albon generally is going to be a better F1 fantasy asset, just because of one of those two problem points that I said with Sainz doesn't apply here. I don't think Albon is going to be nearly as expensive as Sainz. If they're going to price Sainz like really high, up towards like 13, 14 million, I could see a world where Albon is 9 million, right? And in that case, Albon is obviously the much, much better asset. Now, if they're actually super fast, I mean, you probably go for both, but Albon could be a much better asset just because he's cheaper, even though he's at that risk of you know, getting the P11 to P11 curse. He could still bring in points, and even then you've not spent your entire budget on him and can afford other good C-tier assets or a better premium assets compared to if you went with Sainz. So I'm not sure I'm jumping on the Williams hype train, at least not F1 fantasy wise yet. Just driver constructor wise, they look pretty exciting, but F1 fantasy wise, I'm not entirely sold yet. We'll have to wait and see how they look when we get to Australia. Let's talk about an actual winner, right? We talked about the fake winner. Let's talk about some long run pace. So this is from F1 telemetry data on Twitter. I'll leave a link to their Twitter in the description because I look at their stuff quite a lot. This is from day 3 long runs, and this is sort of what I was talking about. Like Albon, the long run pace is just it's not far off, right? But it's not really close to where the others are. And I mean, Russell's was way, way better today compared to even Piastri, right? So Russell looked quite good today. But this is what I'm talking about. There is still this gap between Albon and I mean, also the McLaren, even though they had a few overlapping points, that I do think Williams are going to still be among the C-tier constructors and not be sort of lumped in with the premiums just yet. But the main long run piece of data that I saw was from day 2, and that was the proper long runs made by Norris, Leclerc, and Antonelli. And in this, I mean, Norris looked great. Norris looked fantastic, and he really looks to be one to watch going into the season. But obviously, at the start of the year, we might not want to go for those A-tiers if you want to build budget. And I'm expecting Norris to be an A-tier asset above 25 million. I'm not so sure about Piastri. I don't think they're going to price Piastri that high. And in a world where Norris is an A-tier asset and Piastri is a B-tier asset, I think Piastri is a fantastic option to start the season because let's just remember what happened last year, right? Lando beat Piastri 19-4 in qualifying, but Piastri pretty much matched him race pace-wise. And for that reason, I mean, we talked about it just now with Albon and Sainz, qualifying low might not be bad. And yes, Norris might go P1 to P1, win the race, take home 45 points. But if he's an A-tier asset and you're trying to build budget, sure, you're fine with letting go of those points. Whereas if Piastri's sitting in as good of a car as Lando is and qualifying slightly further back, P4, P5, can maybe climb to a P3, that's some good points right there. And, you know, put him on a 2X, he's going to gain a lot of value. And he's also going to enable you to pick better C-tier assets that can also rise in value so that you can fit in Lando, Norris, and another A-tier constructor or driver much sooner into the season. So for that reason, I think Piastri, like this, even though this data talks about Norris specifically and how good he was compared to Leclerc and Antonelli, I think this really shows that Piastri is one to watch because I feel like you really want to have a piece of the McLaren cake to start the season, but I just cannot see either Norris, or like mainly Norris, but also the McLaren constructor being below 25 million. I mean, Norris looks to be the favorite to win the drivers championship this year, and McLaren look to remain the favorites for the constructors championship. They have looked better than Ferrari so far over the course of testing. If you're gonna grab a piece of the McLaren pie, but also grab a piece of the budget building pie, I think Piastri looks to be a really, really interesting asset. Let's go back to talking about a C-tier constructor. I think one that I'm actually more optimistic about than Williams is actually Alpine. Not constructor-wise, I'm talking drivers, and specifically talking about Pierre Gasly here. I think Pierre Gasly could be a really good option to start the year. I think, he's shown in qualifying that he can actually medal and properly put that up into P4, P5 territory, and in that case, going from P5 to P8, that's definitely enough for a C-tier to rise solidly in price. And he did finish last year best of the rest, and I think he could continue being best of the rest if this Williams hype is a bit overblown. I think he's also going to be expensive, very likely so. But I am more keen on sort of a tested Alpine from the end of last year than the Williams, right? And I know it just doesn't carry over like that all the time, but it could be, right? So Alpine looks really interesting. I think Gasly could be a really good option. I actually prefer Gasly to Sainz, and I also think Sainz is going to be more expensive than what Gasly is. But even someone like a Jack Doohan could do really well in an Alpine if the car is competitive, if the car is good. I don't think he's going to be priced highly. I think he's going to be a very, very cheap asset. And especially as a rookie, on his home race, if he starts further back and climb a bit in a fast Alpine car, that could be a good, solid point score, Magnussen type vibes. So I'm really interested in Alpine. I'm really interested in both Jack Doohan and Gasly. I can't wait to see what their price comes in at. And especially as a rookie in his home race, he can do Magnussen type vibes, Jack Doohan. And especially for a cheap price. Speaking of Magnussen type vibes, let's talk about Haas. Ole Behrman, Esteban Ocon. Still haven't seen too much of them, but we didn't see a lot of Haas last year in testing either. They also just sat out there doing a lot of laps, and they did the same this year. And Komatsu, I've seen interviews with him, and they really want to focus on that race pace of the car, and they're just leaving that car out to run. They don't care at all about what the results look like now. They only care about what the results look like in Australia, and they really want the car to drive well and be able to take climb positions. And they really did that last year. They were so good on track and so good in F1 fantasy. So I'm still very, very interested in what the pricing of them two are going to be. I think they're going to be sort of in between I think there's going to be two different tiers of C tiers, if you will. I think there's going to be and then with one being the Aston Martin, that's kind of an unknown. But I think Alpine, or rather Pierre Gasly, Albon and Sainz are going to be highly priced. And then there's going to be the RBs, Hadjar, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, and Bortoleto are going to be lower. No idea where they're going to price Aston Martin in that, but then I think the Haas will slot in right in between those two tiers, which I think could be really, really good, especially if they continue. I mean, Oliver Behrman just qualify last and climb until P12, do a Kevin Magnussen, get 25 points. Sounds great, and I honestly can't wait. So then with the Aston Martins, it's really difficult. They feel like the biggest question mark to me. I have no idea where they're going to be and how they're going to be performing. I really can't say much about them. I think for me, early on, they're going to be avoids. I think they can't price Alonso too high. And if they price Alonso high, he's definitely not going to be an option. And I don't trust Lance Stroll at all. So right now, for me, both of them are avoids before seeing any pricing. And finally, on the C tier scale, we do have the two teams that look to be P9, P10, and that's RB and Kick Sauber. Very difficult to place these two teams. I think Bortoleto is likely to be the cheapest asset in the game. I think Hadjar could come close. I think they're definitely going to be our two cheapest assets this year, which means you're likely going to be forced to pick at least one of them if you want to build a rounded team and get some of those highly priced C tier and premium assets. And right now, if I had to pick one of them, it would be Bortoleto. I think Bortoleto could show one new things, starting P20, finish P19, get 3 points, call it a day type deal. Whereas RB, I wouldn't be surprised if they're the team that gets P13 and then drops back to P15. Not excited about them at all. But overall, I'm more excited about the rookies than the seasoned drivers. Nico Hulkenberg, Yuki Tsunoda, they're both really talented drivers. And I'm not saying that the rookies aren't, but the rookies, right? So I can definitely see Hulkenberg and Tsunoda, qualify, get a cheeky Q3 qualification or at least in the upper echelons of Q2, especially amongst all of these other rookies, and then just end up not having the race pace to follow the rest of the grid at all and dropping back. So I'd actually rather probably, as of right now, go for Hadjar and Bortoleto and just not touch Tsunoda and Hulkenberg. I'm not going into team selection week excited to pick up either Tsunoda or Hulkenberg, whereas I would be fine if I had to slot in a Hadjar or a Bortoleto in terms of pricing. So that's just my thoughts on the C tiers. Let's move back up and talk about the upper fields for a little bit. So as we go into talk about the premium drivers, I've already mentioned McLaren briefly and how I think I want, Piastri to be in my team early on for both budget building and getting those premium McLaren points. I can't really say too much about the other three, and I know that's disappointing. I'm a Ferrari fan. I want to be able to say, you should buy this, you should buy that. But it's really difficult to say anything F1 fantasy-wise about the top teams before the pricing is out. I can make sort of calculated guesses, especially with the McLaren pricing. But it is really going to depend on how expensive the constructors are compared to the drivers. I talked about this in great lengths with Ewan yesterday. So if you want to listen to the entirety of that chat, look at the video in the description. But briefly, it basically means that if the constructors are super expensive and all of them are in the A tier, even Mercedes, in that case, the drivers' pricing don't matter as much. And if they're all down in the B tier, you can just go for whichever you think is going to be the fastest. So you could go for Leclerc, you could go for Hamilton, you could go for Max Verstappen, right? You could go for whichever if you're going for a budget building route with cheaper constructors because of the premium constructors being so expensive. It also depends on what your strategy is going to be. Do you want to even do that, or are you going to go out and spend 27 million on a McLaren constructor to start the season? It's all relative, and we don't know yet. In terms of their testing results, it's very difficult to say. Red Bull were hard to read, but I mean, Red Bull's Red Bull, Verstappen's Verstappen. He's always going to be up amongst them, but he's always going to be quite expensive. I would be surprised if they priced him lower than 25 million, even though he might be supposed to be one. So I'm not really going into F1 Fantasy Week excited about Max Verstappen as an option for my team personally. It's right now my only real lock. If I were to build a team in my head right now, I think I'm likely doing Oscar Piastri is my one premium driver, and then I'm going for one or two premium constructors if there's two premium constructors below 25 million. If say both Red Bull and if it's say both Red Bull Racing and Mercedes, or even maybe Ferrari are below 25 million, I'm definitely locking out playing two of those as my constructors alongside, like a Piastri, and then just going for the C tiers that I can afford with that. Or if I'm interested in doing a budget building route, I could go for something like a Williams constructor or an Alpine constructor alongside a Mercedes constructor with some more expensive C tier assets to try and focus on that budget building with, again, Oscar Piastri as that 2x premium option in there. And that's sort of what I'm seeing. I don't see anything else jumping out at me in terms of the performance. I spoke before in a different video about the difference between Hamilton and Leclerc, and I think Leclerc's going to be quite expensive, so I'm more likely to go for Hamilton, because if Hamilton can recreate what he did in Mercedes, and what he did in Mercedes was, he qualified 8th and then finished up where Russell was. If Hamilton can do that, then he's going to be a really, really good option, especially in a Ferrari, which looks to be the better car than the Mercedes, just generally, right? If we're going to continue from the trends from last year. I know George Russell was really good on both the long term and the long run and short run pace today, but again, it's testing. So overall, in terms of the premiums, it depends so much where they fall on that 25 million line, and if the constructor is above that or below that changes everything, right? And also where they're at in comparison to the drivers. If it's like last year where, Leclerc's 19 million and Ferrari's 19 million, I'm going to pick Ferrari 10 times out of 10. It's not even a question anymore. But if we're beginning to see bigger and bigger gaps, I would have to do calculations on what I actually lose by going for one over the other in terms of the value lost as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens when the prices drop. I can't wait for the game to drop. And when the game drops, if it's early on next week, I'll go live immediately as soon as I see it, as soon as I'm home and available. I'm going to go live, build my first team live. So subscribe again if you haven't. I think that's going to do for this video. I've discussed, I think, everything I wanted to discuss from what I saw in testing. It's not a lot, but if you want to see more of, testing data and stuff like that, you're in the wrong place. I probably should have said that at the start and not at the end, but there are other people who talk about the tech side of things. I only talk about the F1 fantasy side of things. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and I cannot wait for the game to launch next week, hopefully. See you there, and see you in Australia.